Hello, my name is John Durand, and today I'm going to talk about the integration with the Avalara tax software. We've recently enabled a feature in our system that allows you to leverage an Avalara tax subscription to calculate your taxes on quoted items as well as invoiced items. There are a few prerequisites, which we will talk about first, and then I will talk about how to actually use the system and how the functionality actually works. In any case, the first thing is under Tools in the menu, you will find that there is a Avalara Sales Tax Setup. That's going to be one of the first steps, and we're going to do that with you if you wish to turn on this feature. When you actually click on this, it will tell you that it's going to use our web application to do the interface and configure it. When you do this, there will actually be a screen that will pop up on your web browser, and that says set up Avalara. It's going to ask for your account number and a license key and your company code, which are usually the same number as your account number. Now, those are identifiers provided to you with your subscription to Avalara. Avalara is a paid service, obviously. Next are a few different identifiers. There is a development or test mode. We will provide you with the actual production link or URL to be put in there. And you can actually switch from trial to on actual performance. So we're going to actually want to do a few trials at first, make sure that everything is configured and operating properly for you before turning it on full boat with the production in there. Once you've identified all of these, you will click the Save and Test Connection. And if everything is successful and properly set up, it will give you a message saying successfully connected. As that is performed, there's a few things to know about the system at that point. Since we are using Avalara, it needs to identify a few things. For example, let's take an account here. And here's a sample account. And one of the fields that you have in the system is the company type, with a drop-down list that is there for you to choose from to identify what type of company they are. In the past, you would have used tax-exempt billing or tax-exempt material as an identifier for tax exemptions. And that is still being used by people who use our system but don't have Avalara. But once you turn on Avalara, Avalara is validating those. It still would require the exemption number if they are exempt, but it will validate based on the industry, the standard government recognized industry codes, if this is a non-taxable or tax exempt, should I say, entity. From there, it will apply it to any transaction within it. So this is going to be something new that you need to set up for all of your accounts out there and go identify who is what and so on. So this won't actually play into the process itself. Another thing that you will need to actually identify is there's a drop-down list in the system. Basically, to explain this is that each item in a transaction, may it be a quote or an invoice, Avalara will go and validate what type of item it is, and will identify also to what type of company you're doing it, and will also identify the provider, yourself, where are you located, and the person you're selling to, where are they located. There are destination and origination potential sales tax in different states. So Avalara wants to try and identify what your liability is in regards to this client, where they're located, what industry they are in, and even what are you selling them. Some things, for example, in some states, services are non-taxable, while they may be in other states. They may be in states where you do business, where you're located, but if you're selling from out of state, they might not be. So the discriminator is always down to the item level. With that said, means that one of your administrators in the system is going to need to go to Tools and edit a drop-down list. And the particular drop-down list that we want to actually take a look at and edit is the price list category. Now, this price list category is something that you assign to each item in your price list. What category are they for? They actually are used in our job costing module, but you will find that each of these items also have now a Avalara tax code equivalent. So Avalara actually provide you with a list of different codes that you're going to need to associate to those categories, such as a labor item is going to be a code S with a bunch of zeros, services, in which you can choose from a drop-down that will need to be set up. There are obviously more than 4 codes in the system, and these can be found by going to the website that we will provide you. There is one that gives you the Avalara system tax codes, and it will give you all the codes themselves. There is also a Avalara tax code URL that you can go to and identify based on categories what actual type of goods description and what their equivalent code is. Now, this may sound daunting that oh, wow, we have thousands of items in our price list and so on. But for the vast majority of our customers, in the price list, what is going to be provided is going to be basically mostly components, hardware or something like that. So it's going to be something out of manufacturing, something that was built. There are going to be labor services, obviously. And there could be, potentially some software. Now, one of the things that will be in there is freight. And freight is something to be treated. There are actually 35 different categories for freight. So I'm going to tell you to be very diligent. Use the Avalara website to do research. They provide you a lot of detailed information. Especially consider freight. There's a lot of things from that nature and so on. But identifying all of those, your Avalara rep should be able to help you to identify. You're going to come down to a short list of a few items, probably less than 10, maybe even half of that you actually use in what you sell customers. Either labor, services, materials, equipment, or transportation, freight, things of that nature. Could be expenses, obviously, and things like that. So this is going to be an important part for you to properly document what it is that you actually sell or bill your customers for. Once you have that list, you're going to apply it to the list of categories that you have in the system. So basically, the categories is what you use for your job costing to tell you, hey, you were supposed to make so much in equipment sales, so much in labor, so much and this is where your costs were. Well, it's a translation table for a direct link from these things to what your selection is. In our case, transport is identified as FR020100, which is straightforward freight. It's not shipping and handling. You'll find out that bundling those two together can be a problem tax-wise, tax management, you might not believe. In any case, so we have like tangible personal property, which are basically parts, equipment, and materials. So relatively simple from that standpoint, as you can see. In our example, we also have labor. We have maintenance services, which is also considered labor for us. And those are basically under the same category as that. We have a general other, which has a other category. And anything that is labeled other or that isn't a transaction and does not have an Avalara tax code linked to it. In the absence of a tax code, Avalara tax code in a transaction for an item, the Avalara system will define, well, that has to be a taxable item and we'll charge tax on it. So if you're it will basically default and make sure that you're charging tax. If you don't tell them what it is, then they'll make you collect the tax on it to make sure you're not missing out on something. So important to actually have those properly set up. So we have two different areas from that standpoint. Well, there's also the area, once you have those set up, of your actual price list. And in the price list, you will have items such as freight, transportation, and things like that that you may have. And in those, it will be important to select this category. The category is the link to the Avalara Sales Tax Code. So important that each item that you select has an actual category associated with it. And that's what's going to do the translation, as we're going to show a little bit later when we actually do a transaction in the system. A quick note about these things also, you're going to notice that we do taxable. We have some taxable flags and things a little bit all over the place. Those are basically inherited from the basic system without Avalara. We ask the users to normally identify what is taxable or not, or considered taxable. You're responsible yourself, if you're not using the Avalara integration, to identify what you think is taxable and basically what counties and what rates are managed out there. But when Avalara takes over, when you have a subscription with them, all of these are somewhat meaningless in the system. They're just plain identifiers, but they're not justifiers for the transaction. Avalara will adjust those as it sees fit. So, given a situation like this, one of the things that I mentioned also is you have to identify the actual location, site where things are happening. Where are you providing these services or selling these materials and so on? So the actual site address is very important, more so than the mailing address. That's where you communicate with them. But the site address is what Avalara will use to identify as the destination of the rendered products and services. And that's what it will use to actually find where what tax rates are to be used for these. In my example that I have here, I use purposely a zip code of 91941, which is in San Diego County. And this address here is an actual address that exists, and it says it's in La Mesa, but for my example here is that the Post Service labeled it La Mesa. It's not really in La Mesa. But if you write a letter to this address, you have to put La Mesa as the city in there. It's actually outside of the city itself and in the county. So while this address says La Mesa and area code, zip code 91941, you're going to find I have another address in here called La Mesa, and it has a different address. It's still in La Mesa, and this one is actually in the city of La Mesa. And so the tax rate here is, I believe, like 0.75% more than San Diego County. Why? Because the city of La Mesa have a surtax that they apply on top of the state and county taxes in there. While the other address is still in the same zip code, but it is outside, physically outside of the city of La Mesa. And thus, the tax rate is different. So those are just an example of tests that we did to make sure that Avalara is coming back properly with the right taxes. You will see here that in the past, you used to set the sales tax county for each of those locations. And by setting this is what it determined that, okay, this is, look it up in the tax table in the system, what's the tax rate for it? Well, with Avalara, when you actually do a transaction, and each time you do a transaction, it will validate based on the destination address and update not only the line items of what's being invoiced or quoted, but will go in and update the sales tax county at that location level. So I did a transaction previously for this site, and it went to Avalara, and it brought back and it said, you know what? Here's the actual authority or jurisdiction, should we say, minutia of where that item is taking place and basically what tax rate should apply to it. Well, if we looked at the other location here, it said it's San Diego County District Tax XSP, which is basically the special county-based rate, and the other one doesn't apply. You'll notice also that the sales tax county button is grayed out. You usually see this sales tax button as not grayed out if you don't use Avalara, because it wants you to say, hey, tell us what sales tax county it is, and you manage your sales tax county in the system and your sales tax rate. You're responsible of those. With Avalara, there is no need for that anymore. Avalara will take that over and update all the transactions for you. So let's go and actually take an activity here in the system for this. And I'm going to take this particular activity here that I've got scheduled, a service to be done, no relevancy as to what it's for or anything, but I'm going to convert it to an actual confirmed service. I'm going to schedule it for right now and simply make it active. And I'm going to give a little demonstration of what might happen here. Obviously, we want a billable transaction. We have that set up now. And we're going to actually assign somebody to do the service at that site. So as I do this, I will assign myself in here for this task. As an assignee to this, I can then go and fill out service reports and so on. So in the normal life cycle, this job is being performed, so therefore I would fill out a service report. And I'm going to give you a little more expletive demonstration here by showing you every piece of the puzzle of how you can invoice at the same time. So I'm going to select the UPS service report for this job. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the actual time in there of what it gives me an arrival of 11. I'm going to put myself as if I had left this job, let's say at 2 p.m. And without filling out the service report, I'm going to put a date completed on it because, you know, until I've done the service here, it would not normally be billable or anything of that nature. Now, by having done so, I want to identify probably who I am. I was the technician on that job, who was the customer, and the arrival status. It was offline, and when I was done, it was online, hopefully. One of the things that I would do is add my time and mileage. So maybe I'm using the mobile version, slightly different, but basically I'm be performing pretty much the same thing. And I'd go and add, and basically based on my arrival and departure, it's saying I've been on site for 2.81 hours. And it wants to put my labor standard time at 2.81 hours in the system. So I am, some of you probably don't bill on partial times, you round them up or down or so on. That feature is there, but we'll skip that for the purpose of this demonstration. One thing that I might actually do that would have an impact of the invoice besides how much time I've spent on this would be to use parts. So perhaps I use the part on this and I'm going to go and add a part from my price list. So remember, again, we talked about this earlier where every item in my price list needs to be associated. So I'm going to take this Ferraz fuse labeled at $35 here, and just to show you here, I do have a category in there. It's labeled materials. Now, remember, materials is linked to a particular code in Avalara, and that's going to be a determinator of, you know, what this may be taxable or not. It's listed as taxable here because I used to use the system before Avalara, and I had flagged this as a taxable item, but that's really irrelevant at this point. We do want to keep those there should ever you leave Avalara and come back to the system so that it knows again, oh, well, then with the absence of Avalara, this should be a taxable item. So I'm going to take this item and I'm going to add it on the job. So I've actually used the part and I've put some labor against it. I will actually simply say at this point that I've done that, and I'm going to save and close this. It tells me my service report's not complete, obviously. Don't need to do that for this purpose of this example. But as I have done this and the job gets completed out in the field and is reviewed, eventually it ends up that it is ready to bill and it ends up in your billing queue. Now, just to show you, in the invoice, there is nothing in there at this point. So should this have been cleared by the service department and end up in billing, when it ends up here, that job still has nothing showing for it. What the billing people would do is review service time perhaps. And when they see service time, they're going to see that there is labor, 2.81 labor, and there could be multiple people on it. And they're probably going to want to see that there's an approved on date on that time, which I skip just for the essence of saving time here. And I will say copy all to billing. And basically, it took that information and put it into billing. Now, it knows it's time, and so it put it under the category of maintenance services, which is what we tied it to in the system here. Yours may be associated to straightforward labor, but it went and found the associated Avalara Sales Tax Code of that S00000000 and put it in there with it. We're going to notice here that our tax, we don't have any tax in there. Let's go and get a few fields. Obviously, it tells me what it's been copied from, but for the purpose of this, I'm going to take this out and that out just to get a little bit more feel into this. And I don't need the labor shift either on it. And let's just shrink the description a little bit. All right, so when it brought this in, it brought in and calculated, the price, the selling price to the customer. It went through basically the labor, rates and so on, and said, well, it's 2.81 at $100 an hour, $281. And the sales tax county here came in simply because there's already been an Avalara transaction on it. If there had not been, it would not have been known with the sales tax county, and it would not be there. Notice that the tax percentage is set to 0 and taxes are not in there. And the flag might be marked as taxable or might not. We're going to see when we bring in the next one, which are the parts used. There was a fuse used on it, and I'm going to say copy all to billing for this one. When I come back to billing, we're going to see that in the price list, this was marked as taxable. So it inherited that from the price list, but it didn't put any tax, and it didn't put any tax rate in it at all either, because Avalara hasn't done its validation yet. We are waiting for you to actually have put all of your items in the system prior to invoking Avalara to go and do the validation and calculations of everything. So this flag is not set right now. It's just showing what it was initially in the system. It will change or potentially change once we actually run the Avalara system against it. I'm going to purposely add one more item to this, and I'm going to add freight, because I said it is a touchy topic here. So freight, I'm going to add that in here, and I'm going to select this item here. I got it at 235. I'm simply going to include it in the invoice as is. So I copied some time from the service times I was put in it. I copied some parts used in it, and I actually even added manually some items to it. Now again, if you look at here, freight does say that it's taxable. That's what I had in my system. In reality, it ends up in California that if you are simply passing through a freight charge, not shipping and handling bundled charges together or a flat fee, if you're simply doing a pass-through on freight, from California to California, it is the only time that freight is non-taxable. So purpose of this example, we purposely made it taxable just to demonstrate that it will change once we run the tax calculation. Now, there's two ways to invoke this. There's one, obviously, when you create the invoice here and you click to create the invoice. I'm going to purposely change my template to our latest web templates. When you click on this, create the invoice, well, it's going to want to run this. It will run the tax calculations in the background and generate the invoice from that standpoint. That's done on purpose. We don't want you to send out something that the tax hasn't been calculated. So when you're creating the invoice, we're expecting you got a chance to send it out. So taxes need to be calculated. You also have, though, under other billing actions, if you click the drop down, there is a feature down there to say save and calculate sales tax. So it will save any changes you've done to this and will calculate the sales tax. Let's run it like that for right away. So as I ran this, it will actually go to the web and get back from Avalara what it says about it. And basically it came back and it confirmed that this is the sales tax district. It actually updated it. If it was blank or set to something else, it would have updated it. It actually set what the tax rate for that jurisdiction is, 7.75 versus that one in La Mesa, which is at 8.5. So 3/4 cents less. So important, it did the right job. It found the right, based on the actual destination address. Taxable, well, we see that freight, it identified, you know what? Freight is not taxable, not in the case of how you applied this. Great, did its job. So we only have one item that is taxable at 7.75%, and that was the fuse at $35, so it made a tax of $272. Now, an important note to see also, if you calculated $35 and added 7.75 taxes, the actual tax amount would be 2.71125. Now, less than 2.715. Yet it's still rounded up. Avalara will always bump it up if you're in the middle of a penny, just to make sure that you are collecting the appropriate taxes. So it's an always round up no matter what. If you exceed, if it's 2.7109, it's going to say it's 272, not 271. It will always bump it up just to make sure that you cover your liability and collect the proper taxes. With that said, I've actually ran a transaction. Now, for your subscription and the model of how you're paying, you pay Avalara on a per transaction basis. Now, the per transaction are per confirmed transactions, meaning that I could run this another time here, and it's going to run the same calculations, update everything, and just do it. Because I might have actually, well, oh, geez, I need to add an item. I forgot, but there was another item to be added in there. I needed to add a fan. And I'll go and pick a fan. I have a $525 cost fan. And I'm just going to validate here that it has, it's listed as equipment. That's fine. So I'm going to go and add it in there. And obviously, this line came in without anything. It found the matching Avalara code for it, but I need to recalculate it. So I could choose other billing actions, or I could choose create the invoice. No matter what I do, it will actually go and update the record here and go and put that tax on it and pull up that invoice with the actual total tax now updated from it. So it always makes sure, like I say, that the tax that you're charging is proper when you're generating an invoice for it. But we said you have a fee on a per transaction basis with Avalara. Well, a quote is not considered an actual transaction because there's no reporting to any state to be done because you haven't won that quote yet. It's only once you win the quote that you generate an invoice that it's an actual transaction. Now, furthermore, I've ran this twice. So did you just get billed for 2 transactions? No, you actually have not even been billed for a single one yet. Why? Because you have not identified that this has been invoiced yet. So until you actually check the bill done, invoice sent, and you either recalculate, generate the invoice, or save and close, until that point in time, that transaction does not count for you. It's registered, but it's not an actual confirmed transaction. It has not physically, or should I say, actually taken place until you flag it. So only once you've done this. So what that means is that if you are satisfied with the invoice, then mark it as billable, invoice send out the invoice, save and close it, and you're good. Should you have made a mistake, after having done this, you will have to come back on the invoice, do a correction, and run a new transaction. So that would be a second transaction. So obviously, what we want you to do is make sure that you have a valid invoice, everything is in place, mark it as billed before you actually, mark it as billed and then save it. So the actual transaction is recorded. Because that's the only time, once it's marked as billed, that it will be in the reports, that Avalara will generate the reports and let you know what you owe where and so on. Or if they actually do your filing for you, they will file based only on things that are actually marked as billed on and sent to the customer. And all we have to do is save and close. The only last little note that I have is for our users that actually integrate with an accounting system, for example, QuickBooks, and things of that nature. One of the things with Avalara is it will, in the background, break down not only that $2.72, or actually 40-some-odd dollars given at the end there. It will break down your tax liability and say, you owe 6% to the state of California. You owe 1% to the county of San Diego, and 3/4 in special sales tax. That's what makes up that 7.75. So in reality, in the past, you would look and say, where was your tax authority, the jurisdiction, and simply report based on that in our system. And thus, the tax authority to whom you're paying to, no matter what, will be the state. So it's the state that you're in. Now, given that, Avalara does not provide the actual name of the entity who actually collects the tax collector's name. So in absence of that, when we look at our billing and billable events, which is what we use to synchronize with QuickBooks, you'll see I have 2 transactions in there for today, one performed earlier and the one that we just performed now. And if I go to my for export to accounting, under the name column, which is the client's name and so on, so the entity with whom the transaction has taken place, you'll find that the 2 transactions I processed today had sales tax in there. Now, the sales tax really relates more to who you're paying that sales tax, not the customer. You've collected that from the customer, but who is it payable to? What you will get are the 2 initials, authorized initial for that state, followed by the words tax collector. So that's going to be your identifier. And that may be added if you're using, let's say, QuickBooks and doing the full integration. It may be added as a client or customer or entity in the system as California tax collector. There's nothing to worry about that. It does identify the state in which this tax is liable to, but you will be utilizing Avalara either their tax filing service or simply the report that they give you to identify who the actual sales tax is payable. For your books, from a standpoint of QuickBooks, the most important thing to have is just what state was this collected for, and that's your basic bottom line. So it may not, in California, there's a very long name for the actual sales tax collector. A lot of them are like New Jersey Department of Taxation or things like that. It's simply going to put NJ tax collector, simple identifier. So it groups everything together to make sure that everything that New Jersey will be grouped together in your QuickBooks. Yep, like I said, For tax reporting purposes, you're going to defer to Avalara. That's going to give a nitty-gritty breakdown of all the cities, the counties, the special taxes, and the states, and so on. And that concludes our this demonstration and quick guide as to how to set up and how to use the Avalara Sales Tax integration. Obviously, we will help you throughout the implementation of it and getting it in place, as well as your authorized rep of Avalara will help you on the side of identifying the proper codes to be used in the system. There are a few things, like we said, that need to be set up as prerequisites for these to function. And we will run a few tests to make sure that everything is set up accordingly prior to turning it on live and so on. So don't hesitate. If you have questions as you're going through this process, contact us first if you want. And if it's a Avalara question, we'll point you in their direction. But we will be glad to assist you throughout the implementation of this new feature. Thank you for your time, and may your implementation be quick, swift, professional, and perfect. Thank you. Have a great day.